Morning, everyone. It's quite a few things to discuss here. So I'm going to start off with just the latest polling. YouGov have brought out a latest poll. Unfortunately, I can't check the details because when they produce the poll and the results, they always link the table to the data. They've linked the wrong table. They've linked the last table. So I have told them. Hopefully, they'll get that sorted. But the bottom line is this is a YouGov poll, which now has the Conservatives on 19 points. It has not been that low since Liz Truss was about. Now, just to sort of, when we're talking about different polls and so on, the two provably reliable pollsters based on recent general elections have been Ipsos Mori and YouGov. They are the top two. Ipsos Mori, like a week or two ago, produced a poll that had the Tories on 19 points, and that was the lowest they'd ever polled the Tories on. They've been going since 1978, right? This was the lowest ever. And now YouGov are sort of saying, yeah, we think 19 as well. So these are the top two pollsters, and they're the Tories. But the thing is, reform, you can actually just see behind my left shoulder. The light blue line is Reform UK moving ever upwards. So you now think about where the Tories are in, the state the Tories are in. So they're thinking to themselves, well, we can't call an election with the polls in this state. We'll get wiped out. Because if you plug that into the electoral calculator, you end up with the Tories, like many polls are producing at the moment, in third place. So they're not even the official opposition. They don't lead the opposition. The next Tory leader will, I mean, if they're in third place, they're where the SNP are now. They'll get a couple of questions at PMQs. That's it, really. It'll be Ed Davey, who's actually the leader of the opposition. Can you imagine what that's going to do to the Conservative Party? If you think about someone's just met 1922 committee there. So let's go on to that. So the 1922 committee, for those who don't know, it's quite funny. It's like a union for Conservative backbenchers. It's hilarious that the Conservatives effectively have a union. But it represents their backbenchers. And regularly they hold, Labour don't have anything similar. Regularly they hold meetings with the leader, and last night Rishi Sunak was meeting with them. And according to reports, there was because what happens is the meeting is private, right? Only MPs are allowed in there, Tory MPs. But journalists hang around on the corridor anyway, so they can listen for cheering and whatever. And then they'll ask MPs on the way out so things get leaked. And there were reports that there was a full minute of desk banging. Now, for those who don't know this is like posh people. Like we normally would cheer, we clap if we approve of something. Stamping your feet or banging desks is what posh people do, or people from certain backgrounds do to show their approval. So you get it in politics a lot. So desk banging is a show of approval, and you can think to yourself, okay, a full minute of desk banging, that is MP saying, we back you, Rishi Sunak, isn't it? That is them saying, look, we don't think we can replace him, and they want to send a message to their rebellious colleagues that they must not agitate. We're sticking with Sunak, so you need to fall in line with him to help us in the election, right? However, some commentators have been pointing out a few little bits of context. So when Liz Truss met the 1922 committee on the 12th of October 2022, she received loud desk banging of approval, and a week later she was resigning. Boris Johnson in June 2022 attended a 1922 committee meeting where there was loud desk banging, and then a month later he was resigning. And Theresa May in December of 2018 received loud desk banging at a 1922 committee meeting, and a month later she was facing a confidence vote. The letters had gone in. So although Someone's just said there 1922 is generous, more like 1822. Was that the 1822 overture? Is it the 1822 overture? I'm not really all that good at classical music. But yes, there were a lot of very loud banging. And I actually do think it was more like the drums of war, because if you think about those contexts, when MPs have really made a show of support for their leader, and for the last three leaders, it has followed a matter of days or weeks later with either their resignation or a vote of confidence, you do get the feeling that maybe this desk banging is not a show of support, but a warning that you're treading on thin ice, mate. And then think about the context. This is Alex Andrews' tweet. Indeed, yes. Think about the context as well. So, Tory MPs have now been given a one-line whip. Now, what does that mean? It means the Tory leadership have told Tory MPs they don't need to be in Parliament anymore. They're going into Easter recess. The House of Commons is still in session until up to and including next Tuesday. And then after that, it's the Easter recess for a few weeks. Now, by telling MPs that it's a one-line whip now, that means you don't have, if you're in Parliament, fine, you don't have to be. So that is a sign that there's not going to be any more votes that the government care about in Parliament. And bear in mind that the House of Lords last night put a load of amendments back onto the Rwanda bill. So that means the government are not planning on dealing with those amendments this side of Easter, right? So, because that would be quite important for MPs to be there. I think what's happened here is the Tory leadership, I think they recognise that desk banging's a warning and not approval, and they've sent them home. And why have they sent them home? Because Tory MPs who are sat around in the House of Commons, in the tea rooms, in the bars, what do? They talk to each other, they plot, right? Once they've gone back to their constituencies, the plotting is not so serious, because you could think they could be plotting on like social media, WhatsApp, things like that. They probably don't trust other people in the group. So the amount of actual plotting will probably be diminished once they're back in their constituencies. So I think that's what's happened. Why does Parliament get so many recesses? Part of it is because, to be fair, MPs also have work to do in their own constituencies. Like, you know, you're trying to juggle two things as an MP. The good MPs, that is, the ones who do their duty. You've got work to do in your local constituency, meeting constituents, listening to their problems. You're supposed to hold surgeries where they can come to you and say, I've got this problem, can you help? So they need to be able to do that. And, you know, but you can't have them missing important votes because they're helping their constituencies. So what you usually do is you say, look, you know, these are where, if the government's got major votes coming up, where it needs its MPs in Parliament, if it's a really serious vote, it issues a 3-line whip. A 2-line whip is where we want you in Parliament, but we understand some of you will have other things on. And a 1-line whip is do what you like. So they have recesses so that MPs can go back to their constituents and put in like full weeks of constituency work. It's not a holiday. Why can't they use normal English and 1-line whip? Because our Parliament is very, very ancient. Our Parliament, in fact, the Conservative Party is older than most countries in the world. Our Parliament is older than almost every country in the world, including the UK. Our Parliament far goes back much further than the UK. But there we go. But yeah, so it is all very tricky at the moment. And also think about what happens after Easter. So Parliament returns on, I think it's the 15th of April. Now, that is 3.5 weeks before the local and mayoral election. So we're sort of getting the idea they're not going to call the general election for spring now. So that means that as soon as we come back after Easter, we're straight into the local election campaign, just straight into it. The first PMQ is going to be interesting. And I can't wait to see what scandals emerge over Easter, because, you know, in theory, you'd think it would go a bit quiet. I bet it doesn't. So if you think in terms of that desk banging being a warning, maybe the flashpoint will be the local election. So the local elections on May the 2nd, and the mayoral elections, of course. if they're really bad for the Tories, and I think they're going to be really bad for the Tories, then maybe there is a flurry of letters on May the 3rd. Because it doesn't matter what the majority of Tory MPs think. It doesn't matter if the majority of Tory MPs think that it would be worse to replace Sunak than to stick with him, even though I think most of them now accept he's basically useless. And it's someone's just said 4-week recess. Oh, it's not quite 4 weeks, but to moonlight if you're a Tory MP. So, I mean, yeah, there is a bit of moonlighting goes on as well, if we're honest. And yes, some of them will use it for that, because there are some MPs who don't do their constituents' work. My MP doesn't. Now, I will say he used to a little bit. He never used to do surgeries, though, so he was never very good. But he did used to at least reply to you if you emailed him. Now he doesn't. He doesn't email anymore. And he's standing down, so he doesn't give a shit. He don't care. Iceland's parliament's older than ours. I didn't say it was the oldest. But it is older than the vast majority of other countries. Although I don't actually know how old Iceland's is, but I know Iceland itself is very, very old. After he says that when some dude crawls out from under a rock. Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm going to be interested in the local elections for numerous reasons, one of which is to see what Rishi Sunak does. Because so far, Rishi Sunak has singularly failed to go out campaigning in the 48 hours leading up to polls closing. He doesn't go the day before, the day of a poll, by-elections, local elections. He's never anywhere to be seen. Will that change with these local elections? Is he going to get himself onto a general election footing? Right, a couple of super chats have just flown in. Own Knight, £10 super chat, thank you. It says, Phil, speaking as someone that isn't pro-Tory or Labour, what are the points of a Starmer government that are worth voting for? Is PR an option? Pay increase? Will we see investment in buildings? So, I mean, there's a lot of things come through in the media. This is quite a long question to answer. What I would say is if you look up Labour missions on Google, you'll go straight to Labour's policies. They have a lot of policies. Their policies are not austerity. Like people say, oh, it's austerity. No, they're not. And if you actually look up, never mind what people are reporting about what Rachel Reeves said in her speech. If you Google Labour list Rachel Reeves' speech, you will get a full transcript of her speech. If you read that speech, that is actually what Rachel Reeves said. And what Rachel Reeves said, despite the usual suspects all going, oh, she's a Thatcherite. What she actually said is she attacked not just Tory government, she attacked the last Labour government for not providing enough economic security for people on lower incomes. So, yes, you are going to see pay increases. You always do under Labour. Let us be clear about that. You always do. It's a given. It's a factor. Investment in buildings, yes. What Labour are pushing for is they're calling that one reason why Rachel Reeves got into trouble. She talked about a decade of renewal. Going, oh, that's like Thatcher. Except no, but Thatcher didn't renew anything. Rachel Reeves is saying we need to grow the economy. So how do you grow the economy? You can't have workers sick. You need healthcare for workers. That means you need hospitals rebuilding. You need a well-educated workforce. So schools need rebuilding. So yes, we're going to get investment in buildings. We need people to be able to have good housing, because even if a worker is generally fit and healthy, if they're constantly worried about their own domestic situation, they're not productive. Labour get that, right? So they also will be tackling housing. In fact, just this week, they have been again talking about the fact they need to smash NIMBYism. You know, people blocking development, whether it be developments of housing, developments of small scale local energy production. You know, Labour want to absolutely smash it to pieces there. Ian, £5 super chat. Thank you very much. This is why I first started to watch A Different Bias to understand politics. Thank you. No problemo. I will try my best. So yeah, you know, the fact is there's a lot of people, and I know people will have the attitude that, oh, well, Labour will be better than the Tories, so we'll just vote for better, but we're not going to be happy. Okay, people, and, you know, some people won't be happy. I get that. It will be a lot better. It won't just be a bit better, it'll be a lot better. But I also don't want to downplay the fact that, as Rachel Reeves keeps saying, they are going to inherit the biggest economic mess any government has inherited, at least in modern times. Possibly ever. Possibly ever. Gary said, I know a 3-line whip means you can be physically bullied. Well, you're not supposed to be, but it does go on. We really need to modernize things. Yes, we should. We should modernize things. We should certainly modernize the practices in Parliament, just because the problem is it's full of privately educated people who all talk about like tradition, must defend tradition. Like even Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying, "Oh, tradition, of course, must be protected," whilst he was trying to attack a tradition. But anyway, do I not think Starr would look the same if he had half the Parliamentary Labour Party plotting against him? In terms of, is this maybe referring to Sunak? I'm halfway in the conversation here. I mean, the reality is that any leader leads by consent. You can't have a leader who just do exactly what they want. So you have, and there'll come a time where like at the moment, there's a lot of Labour MPs don't agree with what Starmer's doing. Some of them understand why he's doing it. Some of them don't. I always say the biggest thing I learned, I've been interested in politics since pre-teen, like since I was like literally about 7 or 8 years old, right? Watching Spitting Image and Yes Minister and things like that. And I used to watch the political news. I was really interested in politics from a very young age. And obviously, I was naive when I was a kid. And you learn things, you get wiser, you learn things. I carry on learning things. I would say the biggest difference in my attitude to politics now, compared with when I was, say, a teenager, is when I was a teenager, when I was, was young, I used to think MPs were like the top of the tree in politics. I used to think to become an MP, you must really know your politics. I used to watch Yes Minister and think this is a bit silly, isn't it? Because it's making out that this senior minister, this senior member of the government, and in fact, in Yes Prime Minister, he was the actual Prime Minister, is a bit naive when it comes to politics. I thought, well, it's a comedy, right? It's a comedy. The biggest thing I learned is that actually there's a lot of MPs who don't know anything about politics. They're as thick as mince. And I realize now what happened. They just persuaded a small number of people within their local party to back them for whatever reason. And because they're winning essentially under the party's banner, not their own efforts, particularly in many safe seats, you can end up with a lot of MPs who are as thick as mince and they don't understand anything about electoral strategy. So there are Labour MPs who think Starmer is getting, I mean, obviously he's getting some things wrong, but they think he's getting lots wrong. They don't seem to look at polls like this and go, oh, you can't be getting much wrong then. But at the same time, they're not plotting against him because he is delivering them the win that they want. There will come a time where either rightly or wrongly, Starmer is not seen as an asset anymore. It may be that they think, right, just like last time, they're getting themselves into a complacent attitude. We know how to win elections now. We're fine. We can do what we like, and they'll start to tear each other to pieces, or they'll get rid of Starmer because Starmer does lose credibility with the public. It happens to everyone. It happens to all politicians, and then it'll be time for him to go. So, rightly or wrongly, it will happen for Starmer again. I hope in that moment he is more like Leo Varadkar than Rishi Sunak and recognizes that, I've done my work, off I go and leave it for someone else for the next election. But there you go. Right, there's a couple of super chats I missed there. Emma Price, £5 super chat. Thank you. It says, how damaging to Sunak, junior doctors voting for a further 6 months of strikes? Yeah, I mean, I think it is. It's Sunak keeps blaming the doctors for the state of the NHS now. He'll use it to his advantage. But I don't think it's really cutting through to the people he needs to attract. It's just not working. So I do think it's damaging. Unfortunately, it also leaves Labour with a larger waiting list to deal with, but that has to be priced in. And knowing that, again, £5 super chat. Thank you. It says, honestly, I think my chief concern is voting for Labour is that I really hate Blair because of Iraq likes Brown curiously. I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer's going to be starting wars, but he may do something. He may shit the bed in some way. it's a case of what is your alternative? Your alternative, and I know it's a terrible thing to say, and that's why we want electoral reform. But you have to look at the overall thing. You have to look at the overall thing. Could Blair have done better? God, yes. There were loads of things, and Iraq was not even the major problem for me. That was because I sort of understood that he trapped by his own arrogance. He basically cocked up. There were other things he did more deliberately that were wrong. So could and should he have done better? Yes. Did he do better than we would have had with John Major winning, or Ian Duncan Smith winning, or William? Actually, Ian Duncan Smith didn't even get a chance, did he? Michael Howard, I should have said, or William Hague. Yes, we got lots better. And that's the same thing here. Almost nobody can vote for everything that they want. There's going to be, what is it, about 32 million people will vote. There's more than that can vote. It might actually be not as many if voter ID screws a load of people over. But should we say 30 or more million people will be voting in the general election? It's impossible. For a part, because we don't need all 30 million votes, right? Labour to win, I mean, they'll be looking for as many as possible. Let's say they need about 12 million to win a majority. Just say, obviously, it depends where they're spread. Maybe they get more, maybe they get less, but let's say they need 12 million. You cannot come up with a set of main policy promises that will have 12 million people happy. So politics is not about giving people exactly what they want, because it's not possible. It's 12 million people, and they've all got sort of their own ideas. So what you have to do instead is persuade those 12 million people that you represent better than what another roughly 12 million people may vote for. That is ultimately what politics is about. It's why a lot of people are put off from politics. Although I encourage people to take an interest in politics, I understand why a lot of people don't want to, because it's very unpleasant. It's very unpleasant. And you spend, because everyone is in this place in politics, which is not where everyone else is. I mean, if you're in the center, you're at least where most of the people are. If you're someone like me that's out on the fringes somewhere, then, it's like hardly anyone shares my politics. So you're constantly reading about policies that are not quite what you want. I could look down Labour's policies. The ones I always talk about being really excited about are their policies for dealing with water companies. That's the one that actually gets me the most excited. I was asked, I think, recently if I was going to do a video on that for the Labour Vision. I have already done it. It does exist if you look in the playlist. But if you look at most Labour policies, are they what I want? I go, no. Are they better than what the Tories are promoting? Yes. And some of them are all right. They just don't go as far as I would like. But I also understand that most voters, and even key voters, don't want them to go as far as I do. So you either have to make peace with that, or you're just going to have a very angry life whenever you pay attention to politics. And Viv saying, engaged against the last 14 years, the Labour period was golden in comparison. I mean, it was. There were some people who were let down. Rachel Reeves. I mean, that's the thing. Rachel Reeves, in her speech, said that the last Labour government, in fact, let me find. I want to find the exact words. I was going through it again. Says, once again, we found ourselves she was referring to the end of the 1970s here. Says, once again, we found ourselves in a moment of political turbulence and recurrent crises, with the burden falling on the shoulders of working people, with its root a failure to deliver the supply side reform needed to equip Britain to compete in a fast changing world. And she sort of went on as well as to point out that even the last Labour government failed to provide security for people on lower incomes. And she didn't need to say that to what was basically a group of financiers. So the fact that she's saying it unbidden or unneeded to say it to her audience on that day is a suggestion that Labour, it still won't be perfect. We'll still be 10 years down the line thinking, oh, they didn't do that properly, right? But it is still going to be a lot better. And these are not Blairites or Brownites that really now running the show. Am I a pragmatic radical? Well, I sort of am, because I understand. Like, do you know what? There was another article. I wish I could find. I'll have to try and find it. There was an article on Unheard. Let me see if I can find it really quickly, and then try and link it in the description below for people watching later on. In Unheard, right? I don't know whether people are familiar with that. And it was a very good article, because you know how you get people these days who will say, oh, Star is red Tory, really, red Tory. What we want is another Attlee or McDonald. And it's like, but at the time, people were saying the same thing about Attlee and McDonald. The fact of the matter is, there is not a single Labour leader that has won a general election that has been radical, as you would understand the term. And you know, there were, oh, I found it. They were, this article's pointing out that when the Labour Party first formed, you know, the usual authorities were saying, oh, these are like the Bolsheviks, that it's going to be blood on the streets, we're going to have this revolution, we can't let a Labour government in. And then when Labour did come in, and it was like, and you know, and maybe some of these richer Tories were fearing a people's revolution, and the guillotine's been rolled out, and it's like, no, they just sort of ran the country. It was just a government. They didn't do anything. They didn't abolish the monarchy. They didn't abolish the House of Lords. They just basically improved workers' rights, and then promptly lost the election because they were not at that time an election winning machine. That came later. Then Clement Attlee. I mean, people, you know, Clement Attlee and Ramsay MacDonald and Harold Wilson and Tony Blair, all the people that have won a general election for Labour have all come from fairly posh backgrounds as well. All of them. Like Harold Wilson wasn't privately educated, but he did go to grammar school. So he still came from a fairly posh background. So, you know, when people talk about this, like, you know, there isn't ever going to be a radical Labour government, because by definition, radical means scary for most people. Most people are in the centre, right? And they just want stuff working. You know, you can say most people would regret that we left the EU, but they don't want the upheaval of another divisive political campaign for us to go back. Most people would prefer it if our public services were nationalised, right? But they don't want to pay a fortune to do it. You know, so most people want a government that tweaks. Now, we know, we may think about it, there's going to need to be more than just tweaking. And that's right, there is going to be more than need tweaking. But the reason why sometimes Labour will come across as not being particularly radical is because they have to calm people down. They don't want people because people in the centre don't want massive change. They just want things to be a bit better. They just want things to work. You know, it's like your boiler breaking down. People want a plumber to come in and fix the boiler. They don't want to say, we're going to have to rip out your entire central heating system and replace it with something else. Right? Even if that is what is needed. They don't want to be told that. So often what comes across in the mainstream media is fairly it's fairly bland. It's like very vanilla types of politics. Oh, you don't seem to be, you know, talking about very big change here. And yet, if you read their policies, they actually are talking about fairly big change. And I think it necessitates this change. David Falconer, 38 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you very much. Do I think progressive politics in Ireland are on the back foot, Phil? So I don't pay close enough attention to Irish politics to really know. What I do know is I think Leo Varadkar stepping down is an I mean, it's my guess, it's my speculation. It's an acknowledgement that there's general elections coming up in Ireland as well. Like that's next year, I think. And, you know, there is a fear, you know, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, neither of them really like Sinn Féin, let's be clear. And there's a fear that Sinn Féin become much more powerful in Ireland itself after the election and end up running the show in both bits of Ireland. And so I think the Varadkar resignation was probably, you know, he said himself that he's not the person to take his party forward. I think what that is saying, you know, what we need to try and boost some public support is a fresh face. Not that he's been associated with failure or anything, but nonetheless, he just feels, you know, we need to shake things up because on the current trajectory, Sinn Féin will make too many gains for them. So, you know, we will just have to see what happens in Ireland. I don't think Ireland's in anywhere near as bad a state as, for example, ourselves or the United States or even France. I mean, France is looking a bit, it's always, actually, France always looks ropey, doesn't it? Every time there might be new elections on the air, there's always the fear of the far right getting in. You know, there'll be people looking at Italy and going, oh dear. But there we go. Martin saying Jim Callaghan came from a fairly humble background. Yeah, but he didn't win an election. He lost. You know, you say Harold Wilson's background could hardly be described as privileged. He went to grammar school. Back then, that was privilege. You might say the same thing about Margaret Thatcher, right? Because from her point of view, she came from an ordinary background. That's the problem with some of these Tories, is they don't see their own privilege. Like, she thought to herself that because she wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth like most of her Tory colleagues, because she just went, you know, she was the daughter of a grocer and she went to university and stuff like that, doing the normal routes. But at the time she went to university, hardly anyone went to university. Hardly any women went to university. So she was privileged. And Harold Wilson, very much the same thing. You know, you may think, oh, well, you know, his family weren't like stupidly wealthy. Well, it's like, I mean, in a way, neither were Rishi Sunak's, but they still sent him to one of the top public schools. Now, I know Harold Wilson didn't go to a public school, but he went to a grammar school. At the time, that was privilege. That was privilege. Anyway, we'll have to call it there. I've got the last super chat here. I'll do quickly. Martin James, £5 super chat. Thank you. It says, worry Labour have parachuted a candidate for a new constituency who lives, works in London, moaned about the 90-minute drive. Seat is winnable, but Labour isn't trying. I mean, it depends. I don't know the seat. At the end of the day, well, we'll just have to see. We'll see how it works. Obviously, there are going to be some MPs who are more interested in the Westminster side of things and less the locals. You get some MPs who do really good work in their local constituency and don't really do very much at Westminster. It is that balance with MPs, as I say. We'll just have to see how it is. But there we go. We will, and yeah, people just pointing out there about Starmer. The school Starmer went to is now a private school. It wasn't when he went there. It became a fee-paying school whilst he was a pupil there. He didn't pay because he was an existing pupil. But the school, when he went to it, was not fee-paying. But it was obviously a good school because it became so. But there we go. I mean, all successful Labour leaders will come from a certain background anyway. I mean, we just have to accept that. But there you go. And Christopher saying Thatcher went to grammar school and attended both Cambridge and Oxford. Yes. I mean, you know, that is a privilege. You know, people just don't recognize their own privilege. Like I'll leave you with my last thought. I think, you know, I grew up in a mining village in the 80s and my granddad was a miner and stuff like that. And I think I'm fairly down to earth. But yeah, and I had privilege because my parents were well off. You know, my dad wasn't a miner. He didn't struggle during the 80s. You know, he worked for British Rail. He was an engineer, right? But then he ended up making quite a bit of money. So I didn't struggle. I wasn't spoiled, but I didn't struggle. I didn't go to private school. Well, actually, no, I didn't. No, I'm telling a lie. I did for 2 years. I did go to private school for 2 years, and then it was too expensive. So I was thrown into state school from what you would call year 3 onwards nowadays. So I certainly have a certain level of privilege because I had a decent upbringing. There was no worries about going hungry. I was able to do my hobbies. I was able to go to university. I did go to university, you know, so I wasn't sent down the mines at 5 years old. So I was able to spend my weekends reading. I went to the library every weekend and I got some books out and I read them through the week. I used to like reading. And then the next weekend I'd take them back and get some more books. So, you know, you have to recognize your own privilege. And what happens is a lot of people don't understand. They think to themselves, because they came from an ordinary background and they made something of themselves through their hard work, they think, well, anyone can do that. It's like, no, there are some people who have major barriers put in place. and you need to recognise that. But there we go. Graham's talking about adding me to the private school mafia now. I'm not influential in public life, though. But there we go. Anyway, thanks for coming on, everyone. We've gone well over. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.